It is noted that there are levels to being a villain. Some villains will be there to torment the protagonist throughout the story before being defeated, while others simply disappear after serving as minor obstacles. Our female lead is said to be the most useless villain of them all. It is noted that she was powerless and annoying at best rather than threatening. Some asked if she truly is the daughter of Binagi Uegang. The scumbags mention how this girl was only trouble for her father when he was alive, but at least she mourns for him now. The woman mentions that none of this changes how the girl is still a piece of trash. Our protagonist speaks of how gems are placed near dull rocks to stand out. Her role in the story was to be a powerless villain that allowed the true protagonist to shine. The words Binagi Uegang can be seen surrounded by smoke. The death of her father was what made our protagonist realize she was not from this world. She sits wondering why she had to be put in this novel, and at this time point. Based on the martial arts novel she had read in the past, her father was the master of Namgun Ryucheng, who is the novel's hero. Her father was additionally the third son in the Binagi clan, which are among the 10 great clans of martial arts. Most important of all, he was a kind man that made a selfish sacrifice to unlock the selfish hero's full potential. A cup shatters as our female lead trembles. She clasps her hand, noting how weird this is. She read this novel years ago yet now remembers exactly what will happen next. The old geezers behind her murmur about how breaking a cup at a funeral is a bad omen. This also mentions of course this would happen when you have no martial arts talent. Our female lead trembles as she mentions how her father's death would be the catalyst for a decade-long slaughter of characters in the novel. She pricks her hand from touching the broken vase as people laugh, calling her trash. In the dead of night she decides to run away. She dashes in the forest, noting how nobody would care if a minor character like her lives a quiet life elsewhere. As she runs she notes that after getting away she will start a new life and have nothing to do with the story's plot. Something is then thrown at our protagonist, making her eyes widen. She is on the floor and slowly feels dizzier. As she wonders what happened, someone calls this disappointing. They step right next to her as she bleeds out. The man carries his sword as he mentions how he cannot believe Binagi Uegang's daughter is this weak. She then repeats her previous statement about villains not all being the same as we see the guy's face. She wonders why some villains like her have to be useless while watching the man steps closer, especially since other villains get to be the hero's arch nemesis. The young man crouches over as he mentions how she must be asking why. He tells her it is because. The rest of the words cannot be heard due to our female lead's sight fading, and that was how she would end up dying in vain. Later we hear someone mention how much it hurts. Someone tells their dad it hurts while getting whacked. The smacking continues as they continue to shout before begging for someone to save them. The little girl's eyes then flash wide open. She wonders what happened and looks around wondering if she's in her room. As she lies she mentions how she thought she had died. Her eyes then sparkle as someone holds her hand. It is a man who sits by her side and even sheds a tear for her. She internally yells that this is Binagi Uegang. She says father as she wonders about the scene she just saw earlier. She wonders if she is dead and if she is just having flashbacks. She notes how many ladies would admire her father's delicate facial features, but that in contrast he was actually a strong, righteous character that stayed true to his role as the hero's mentor. Due to his nature, there was only one time she'd ever seen her father in tears. A tear drops as her father apologizes to her, saying he should have stayed by her side. This instance was that one occasion. She stares, noting how this is exactly what she remembered him saying. She grins widely as she notes how this is probably just her life flashing before her eyes. She then speaks up, telling her dad to please not cry. He seems stunned, speechless, as our female lead mentions how in the many years she was with him she'd never seen him this shocked. She then gulps as she recalls how her relationship with her father deteriorated as she grew older. She then turns her head as she mentions how she can't even remember him smiling, nor does she remember how he looked the last time she saw him. She calls him a good man, but she hated how he sacrificed himself for the hero. She mentions how despite being an awkward father, everything he did for her was full of sincerity. She then questions herself on why she only came to realize this after he died. She clenches her fist as she recalls him being the only person who was genuinely nice to her in this life and even her past life. She then rises up and tells her dad that she is sorry for everything, and then smiles as she says she loves him. She notes how it does not matter if this is a dream, a flashback, or hell, since these were the lost words she had always wanted to say to him no matter where she is. She smiles proudly and giggles as she notes how shocked he looks. She then mentions how finally she can close her eyes and rest once and for all before a whoosh can be heard. Her eyes widen as her father has rushed over to hug her. He squeezes her so tightly she can hardly breathe. She then recalls how her father always had this same fresh scent before her father says he had always thought she resented him, but it appears as though he was wrong. He tells her to forgive him as despite being her father he never could understand how she felt about him. This was all his fault and he is sorry. He is so sorry as our protagonist now sweats profusely in confusion. She wonders why this dream feels so real, especially since it's supposed to be a flashback. She then wonders if she could actually be back at this point in time. This then causes her to wonder if she could be loved this time around. We then see a panel of hella fine men as it is noted that Yeon deserves all the beautiful things in the world and that this is how her story began. Yeon sits alone on a bed before we see her close up looking dazed. Someone calls for her to no avail before they yell Miss Yeon extra loudly. It is Dangjiam, who is Yeon's personal aide, that is telling her to snap out of it. She has brought water for Yeon to wash her face and questions if Yeon needs help. Yeon nods to say no as the maid then acts like a female dog. She then slams the door before exiting the room. Yeon sighs as someone outside asks what is with all the noise. The female dog tells someone that Yeon did not answer her when she called and seems to have become a fool after nearly dying. The other person mentions how Yeon must be in shock as her Kai seems to be ruined. The female dog then points out how nobody told Yeon to touch that spiritual medicine. As our female lead sits, she notes how plain her room is and how everyone seems to still hate her. She sighs as she notes she really did leap back in time before wondering why it had to be when she was still recovering from Kai deviation. Kai deviation is wild fluctuations in Kai that occur when inner Kai gets out of control. She notes how it was a miracle how she survived, but that her Kai core where inner Kai is stored has been shattered and is in pain. She's gone back to the point where she lost all hopes in ever being a martial artist. The famous Beingri clan was ruled by Pihak, who had 4 kids and 3 wives. His youngest son would come from his 3rd wife, a gifted swordsman unlike any in 100 years who had a gentle character, but was righteous and never backed down against injustice. Yeon then blushes as she kind of brags that this is the kind of man her father is. She then steps out of bed before standing before the bowl of water and staring at her reflection. She is the child he brought into the family one fateful day. As she stares, she notes how unwell she looks before recalling how the news of her existence shocked the clan. People would question how her father could have a child without yet being married and how the girl doesn't even know her mother and seems to have been born in a wedlock. Yeon's grandfather was furious due to having high expectations for his youngest, yet her father remained undeterred. This was how an unwanted girl would come to join this clan, and Yeon notes how she thought her father hated her as well. She then grabs some water and splashes her face, noting how it's not too late. She still has 10 years before her father originally died. She later stands at the front of her father's living quarters with a determined look on her face before stating that she won't let him die this time. Outside the door, she paces around as she is both anxious and nervous. She then grabs her head as she internally yells to not be nervous as she is already here. She tells herself to calm down as she remembers how she'd already started off on the right foot. She tells herself that embarrassment won't last long, but that she needs to keep her father alive so she can survive as well. She continues to motivate herself before the door then rattles open. Her father calls her name and then mentions how she is awake. Yeon gulps with her hands still sideways before clearing her throat and rushing to him saying, "Good morning, father." She then trips on a prop before slowly falling over. Her eyes are closed as her father then grabs her. She is silent, covering her eyes for a moment before opening one of them to peek. Her father is holding her up by the arm. He then mentions how he already told her not to run inside as Yeon notes how embarrassed she feels. She starts to speak before noticing something. Her father seems so tired before she then turns her eyes to see what she tripped on. As she looks around, she mentions how it was a bamboo print and then realizes he must have stayed up all night trying to find a cure for her. Her father then asks what is the matter and if she is unwell again. She then calls him dad and raises up both of her hands. He flinches before turning around and glancing nervously. She then asks if he is going to hold her as he stares back at her. Bro is just so fine, man. Also, didn't they say something about not being married? Yeon is then lifted up as she nervously sits on his arms. She notes how awkward and rigid his posture is. This feels uncomfortable to her as she now realizes he has never held a child before. She herself is not much different, as in both her previous life she had never hugged those she called father. Her father asks if she slept well, to which she says yes she did. He then asks if she feels better, to which she says yes. He tells her not to hide it if she's feeling unwell, and that she must tell him if she has something like a fever. She stares up before resting her head and saying she will. This sweet moment does not last, as he then mentions how he should tell them to get herbal medicine for her. Yeon would later eat and then take her medication. Afterwards were checkups and treatments. This was followed by more medicine, and then sleep on repeat. She notes how she probably tried just about every kind of rare medicine this world has to offer. She lays asleep before slowly opening one eye. She notes how she must have fallen asleep during the treatment as she turns to see the doctor and asks where her father is. The dirtbag then proceeds to ask why Master Yuegang is wasting his time. She yells to wait as the weasel scurries off. Yeon wonders what that was all about as we later see the scenery of the estate. Yeon walks, noting how quiet the courtyard is. She mentions how hers and her father's living quarters are on the western side of the clan compound in a corner. She mentions how her father used to have a different living quarter, but once he took in Yeon, her grandfather sent Yuegang away out of his sight. As Yeon walks, she can't see any servants around as she then hears someone yell to hurry. She then sees a crowd chattering with one another. They talk about how the clan leader has returned. They also mention how there will be a feast and mention how half of them will have to help in the main hall while the other half stays in the living quarters. Yeon notes how her grandfather has returned as she envisions a frightening image of him. She notes how he is a competent man who raised the Beangri clan to become one of the 10 great clans. The man goes to train for a year at a time, and when he's not in isolation he'd take trips and leave the clan without a leader. Yeon recalls him leaving for a trip when she would suffer Kai deviation in her past life. Yeon then notes that he's back before realizing something bad will happen. She then dashes, saying that today is the day where the incident that would cause her grandfather to hate her and her father would occur. She notes that she must stop her father right away or he'll be in danger. She then yells before leaning on a wall before mentioning how she is yet to recover. The murmurs continue as she can hear people talking about her Kai core being shattered. They also talk about how no one knows her real parents and call her an embarrassment to the clan. Her face droops as she notes it is not the time to mind this and that she'll walk if she can't run. The mutts continue to bark as Yeon mentions how she is a useless little villain in the novel, but that she still has a significant backstory that made her a villain. She then mentions how the backstory is actually unfolding in real time before mentioning that she's not the same naive 6-year-old from the past anymore. A man seems shocked as he asks if Miss Yeon is alright. She tries to say she is fine but then coughs. She continues to cough as the man stares in pity. He mentions that she seems sick and asks what brings her here. She asks if her father is here as someone then yells to not be ridiculous. Her grandfather yells asking if Yuegang will continue to embarrass him and if he has yet to come to his senses. The man from before nervously tells Yeon that her father may be busy. He then tells her that this is not a good time to deliver a message as she clenches her clothes. Yeon notes how only people her father grants entry can go in this hall. In other words, those with high status in the clan or those that he acknowledges. She notes how she has neither but that she must do something. She then shudders as someone notes Yeon Beangri is here. Yeon recognizes the voice as we then see a female carrying a fan. This would turn out to be Yuegang's half-sister named Yurin. The man on guard greets the woman as Yurin asks what Yeon is doing here. She then asks if Yuegang brought her here, to which the guard mentions how Yeon came on her own. The filthy animal then angrily notes what the man just said. She then laughs before asking how dare Yeon come to this place and that is no place for someone like her. Yeon's heart beats as she recalls being scared of this ant in her past life. There was a good reason for that, as Yurin would get mad if Yeon even looked at her. On the contrary, if she looked away, Yurin would scold Yeon for not acknowledging her. Essentially, Yeon is not worthy to greet her, but Yeon would get reprimanded if she didn't. Yeon's eyes are shut as she notes how her aunt would always make up reasons to be mad at her. The verbal abuse would only grow worse and worse and would eventually get physical. Our female lead mentions how she used to think her aunt was right to hate her since she was a Beangri who could not learn martial arts. This would change, however, when she overheard her aunt mentioning how she's glad Yuegang died, especially due to his braggadocious sword skills. The lowlife then also mentions how things would now fall back into its rightful place. It was then when she would understand that she was not the one her aunt truly hated. Back to the present, Yurin then asks why Yeon is standing there like a fool. She then notes how, as per usual, her aunt's yelling will make people think she was being rude to her aunt. Yeon then apologizes, saying it's nice to see Aunt Yurin, as she notes she won't let it happen again. She starts to talk about how she could not greet her right away as she is unwell before coughing. She continues to cough as this will make people see that her aunt is harassing a sick niece. She notes how her bad health is finally coming in handy as she even got to see her aunt get flustered. Her aunt then mentions how Yeon made it all the way here, so she must feel better now. It is noted that if Yeon says she does, then her aunt won't feel guilty for scolding her. If she says she doesn't, then her aunt can just send her back to her quarters. Yeon stands thinking as her aunt urges Yeon to tell her. Yeon then mentions how no one was at her living quarters, which stuns the aunt. Yeon continues to say she looked around but everyone was gone and this is why she came here herself. It was her grandfather's second wife's duty to manage the manor and the servants. This is also Aunt Yurin's birth mother. Yeon notes how the reason the servants at her father's quarters are so lazy is because the mother turns a blind eye to them. The mother seems to think it is fine as long as her grandfather does not know about it, but something has changed. Yeon notes how the shouting has stopped and that her grandmother is a martial arts master, so he must have heard everything going on. This is exactly why the dumb hyena was shouting in the first place. The dog starts to try and backtrack, saying the servants would never do that and to stop this nonsense before someone yells for Yurin to get in here right now. The person then yells for Yeon to come in as well. The hyena glares at Yeon, who also glances back. Yeon notes how she won't be falling for these cheap tricks at this age. Inside we see an opulent room before we see a man filled with dark aura. Yeon notes how this man is like a mountain and that his presence alone could kill someone. She then noticed something. She wonders where her father is and glances around. She then flinches as she then sees her father kneeling. He turns and spots her as Yeon notes how she did not expect things to be this bad. The grandfather then yells at Yurin, asking why she is here. Yurin starts to speak to her father as Yeon is still trembling. Yurin mentions how he has returned and that she came to greet him. He questions this as Yurin says yes before grabbing Yeon's shoulder. She then tells Yeon to come with her to greet her grandfather. Yeon notes how this is a ploy to turn all the attention on her. The hyena welcomes her father back and says she hopes he has been well. Her father stares before asking if that's all she wanted to say, to which she says yes. He tells her to leave then if that's the case. She says pardon before he asks if she did not hear him. She is flustered as she says she did. She then asks why as her father starts to speak again. He asks if she has the right to be here as she yells father. This infuriates him as he asks if this is how someone with the Bingri name should be acting. Yurin grovels as she apologizes and asks her father to forgive her. He turns his head as Yeon notes how her grandfather hates repeating himself. Yurin looks up hoping for her big brother's help as the brother then clears his throat, saying he's sure Yurin has learned her lesson. Yurin can't seem to shut up as she tells her father she did learn and that it was wrong, to which her father yells silence. Yurin then rises, saying she shall take her leave then. The door closes as silence has now descended on the room. Yeon notes to herself the same will be done to her if she does not choose her words carefully. Someone then asks Yeon if she feels better and can walk now. It is Yeomuk's son named Myung. Someone then says Myung has a point and that Yeon looks unwell. It is Yeomuk, who is Yeogang's older brother, that now tells Yeon to come over. Yeon recalls how Yeomuk is a man of virtue and does everything fair, while his son is a splitting image of him. Yeon steps over and then kneels down right beside her father. This seems to stun her father and his brother and even the grandfather as well. As Yeon sits in their presence, she notes how her grandfather would have scolded her if she went to her uncle. She then says that she knows what she saw before and recalls back to when Yurin was gloating over her father's death. It turns out Yeomuk was happy as well and ready to claim what belonged to Yeogang. Her uncle and his son are no different from her aunt. Yeon then says oh no as she now feels dizzy. She wobbles as her father calls her name. The grandfather yells that the floor is cold and to get up as Yeon notes she is so weak she can't sit up straight. Her father protests, saying his daughter has not recovered, to which her grandfather says silence. Her father is about to protest again, but he feels something. Yeon places his hand over his as even the grandfather watches. He then asks if Yeon knows why Yeogang is kneeling right now. She says no she does not, to which he asks why she is kneeling as well. She gulps as she then says she heard how her father never disappointed him before she herself became a member of the clan. She then mentions how that likely means this is all due to her as people start to murmur. The grandfather gets them to stop and says that Yeon speaks well, so he'll ask her something. A box is then brought over as Yeon notes it is the Divine Decree suppression pill. Myung tells grandfather that he will tell Yeon what it is as she only recently joined and would not know. Yeon thanks Myung before saying she's already heard of it. She says it is a medicine that can bring back the dead as her grandfather nods. Myung notes how he can see she knows as Yeon smiles, noting how Myung is not mature enough yet to hide how bitter he is. Her grandfather says she is right and that the pill can even return the dying to full health. He also says the formula is lost, so not many pills are left in the world, so no wealth can be used to buy one. He says even he was very lucky to even obtain one. He then yells that her father was insisting on using it to cure her and asks if she thinks she is worthy of it. Her father flinches as she pats his hand. She then boldly says she does think so. She says she does think so, but that she won't need it right now. She notes how there's something she learned in her 2 lifetimes, which is that being too humble will always make others look down on you. The apple never falls far from the tree, so her father must be no different. If she belittles herself, then that's the same as humbling her father. which also would make it harder for him to protect her. She notes how she will not make the same mistake this life as she calls for her grandfather. She asks if she can ask everyone here a question, to which he tells her she may. She asks if the divine pill would cure her Kai core. This stuns everyone in the room as they murmur about how Yeon must be right, as it is the divine pill. Her father remains silent as she notes how he must be wondering the same thing as well. She notes the pill deserves its great reputation, but that saving a dying person is not the same as restoring a Kai core. She then speaks up, saying she believes medicine should be used accordingly and that she is not dying of an illness at the moment. In her past life, her father would receive the pill from grandfather, but despite his expectation, it would not restore her Kai core. The medication was still potent and helped cure all the injuries from Kai deviation, yet it did not solve her shattered Kai core, which was the main issue. She now tells her father she is fine and that she just wants to be with him, and that's all. She notes how the clansmen back then would all complain about how the pill was wasted to make a frail weakling into a healthy weakling. She then bites her lips as she notes how this will be all for nothing if she coughs now and tries to hold it in. Her grandfather sits silent as people murmur. He then asks Yuegang what he thinks of Yeon's words. Yeon continues to hold his hand as he sits silent as well. He then blinks before letting out a big smile. Yeon sits stunned as she realizes. Yuegang tells his father his thoughts have not changed, before mentioning how a father should never give up on his child even when there is only a glimpse of hope. Yeon's heart drops as she internally yells at her father. Yeon notes how her father will definitely get yelled at. She wonders if their relationship will fall apart again, as the grandfather then calls him a pig-headed fool. This stuns Yeon as he calls for the two of them to rise. They stare at one another as Yeon notes what a relief and how her grandfather does not seem angry. Her father rises up and offers his hand. She grabs it as she notes how the relationship seems to not have suffered from this incident. That is, until trouble occurs. Her father calls for her as she stares at him blankly. She can't hear anything he says, like her ears are muffled, and then rubs her mouth as she notes something feels itchy. She then holds her hand up to see blood. He stares at her hand as her mouth has blood as well. She tells herself no way she's throwing up blood after barely being on the cold ground. She then wobbles as she calls this ridiculous before falling over as her father yells her name. She is taken back to when she sat on the streets as a man asks if her name is Yeon. The man carried a long sword and wore an ivory-colored robe, while she herself was homeless and living off garbage on the streets. Even as a child, she could tell he did not belong here and that he had no reason to show interest in her. Later, in a dark room, we see him sit over her bed and then ask why she won't wake up before calling her name. He asked if her name was Yeon before offering his hand, saying that she will take her with him as he is her father. She notes how she felt scared at first holding his hand, but eventually it turned into excitement that she could not contain. That was until at the clan estate she would get called worthless. Her hopes got shattered the moment she entered the large gate of the clan. A flash occurs as Yeon opens her eyes. Yuegang calls her name as she asks her father where they are. He tells her to stay still and asks how she feels. She tells him she is fine and has only a small headache. He breathes a sigh of relief as he then stares down. He asks what she was thinking. He asks why she came all the way here and reminds her that he told her to be careful many times. She says she is sorry and that she made a mistake before someone asks what her mistake was. It is the grandfather who wears a sick outfit. Her father guards her, mentioning how she just woke up, to which the grandfather mentions how Yuegang makes it sound like he's bothering Yeon. He then asks if Yuegang forgot this was his living quarters. Yuegang then asks for forgiveness as the grandfather says enough. Yeon is puzzled, wondering if she's actually in her grandfather's quarter. She then wonders if this is the White Guard Hall before someone comes in saying the herbal brew is ready. Yuegang says he did not have to bring it himself, but the man mentions a maid handed it to him. Yeon stares as she notes this is Jang, her grandfather's right hand. The guy smiles, which stuns Yeon, who had never even talked to this guy in her past life. The drink is already in her hands as her father tells her not to worry. Her father mentions how physician Seok said it would not be too bitter, as Yeon notes that is the imperial family's former physician. She notes how that guy gave her a checkup in her former life, but much later on. She wonders what is going on as her father mentions that Yeon's grandfather called Seok the moment she collapsed. Yeon asks if her grandfather really did that, to which her father says yes. He continues to say she got checked up while unconscious and the physicians will treat her for 3 days in the White Guard Hall. Yeon notes how this is her grandfather's living quarters and how not even any of the sons got to sleep here. She thanks grandpa as he tells her no need. He then asks who taught her to not say anything when she feels unwell as Yuegang reacts. Her grandfather then gives a glance at her before telling Yuegang to take care of her so they don't have to hold a funeral. The father and daughter breathe a sigh of relief after he leaves. Her father then mentions how her grandfather actually did a lot of things to care for her, as Yeon then asks if her father will stay here with her. He says yes, as he cannot trust anyone else with her. Yeon clenches her fist, noting things are going well. She notes all the good signs that are happening before hoping her father and grandfather's relationship can improve. He then calls her name as she notes he is serious now. He asks her why she hid it from him, to which she nervously says what? This is due to her hiding a boatload of things. He shuts his eyes as he mentions how she hid how the servants treated her. She then notes how if her grandfather could hear, then her father probably could have as well. She then assures him, mentioning they are fine when he's around, as he calls her again. He asks if they did not attend to her, to which she sits silent. He then says she was lucky people were around when she collapsed today. He starts to think about what would happen if no one was around to help her. She starts to notice his eyes are red before he springs up, saying this won't do and that he'll take this issue up with mother. This shocks Yeon, who then grabs him, saying he can't, to which he says she must be aware of this incident. Yeon notes her reputation would take a hit if word got out, but that crossing her damages your reputation as well. Yeon notes how mother likely thinks of her father as an eyesore already. She then stares at her father's narrow gaze as she notes he already knows mother hates him. Yet he will still go to her, as this is the right thing to do. She then tells her father it is pointless. He calls her as she then smiles. She mentions how if grandmother scolds the servants, that won't really fix the problem. Two people, including a tsundere grandfather, listen in. Her father says surely it would, to which Yeon says that things might get better on the surface if she scolds the servant. She then asks if he really thinks they would admit fault. She then asks if it's enough to punish the servants who work in her quarters. She then asks about the other servants. She then asks if her grandmother would truly be unaware of how all the servants look down on her. She then says honestly that this will not end until her grandfather accepts her as a member of this clan. This leaves her father speechless while the grandpa listens in. We get a bird's view of the scene as her father asks if she resents grandpa. She says no, as he tells her not to lie. She says really does not, as she understands how he feels. She mentions how grandpa is mad at her only because grandpa loves him that much. Both react as she then says it'd be stranger if he actually accepted her. Yeon then pretends to be grandpa, saying one could bear a child outside of marriage and that he's just happy to have another granddaughter. Yeon mentions how if he said that it'd be more strange, as the right hand can't help but laugh. Uigang then says Yeon is only 6 and asks how she could say such things. He then stops as she now hugs him. She then says she is sure grandpa will accept her someday if she tries hard enough. The truth is that the novel never truly said her grandpa loves Uigang. Their relationship was no better than our female lead's relationship with her former father, as it only got worse over time. She does however remember seeing her grandpa's bloodshot eyes during her father's funeral. She notes this is all she needed to know and that this is more than enough reason to think highly of him. Her grandpa is emotionless before we see that he has left. Drops of water fall on plants and the rain can be seen from the window. Yeon lays wondering if it is raining as her room starts to get wet. She notes that she must wipe the water off and then recalls back to her time in the White Guard Hall when everything was done for her. As her head hurts, she wishes to sleep just a bit more, but then is awoken by someone yelling about the pain. Yeon wonders what the commotion is as Dangjim continues to yell about how every step hurts. Yeon notes how this is her maid and wonders what she is so furious about. The idiot yells, complaining about how Yeon must think she's a clansman or something, and wonders how she went to the central hall. The other maid mentions how the Grand Madam had no choice, as even Lord Bingri learned of it. The girl then mentions how another servant was flogged 20 times and says Dangjim got it better. She then wonders if that is why the other servant does not have to work today, before continuing to whine. They continue to chatter as Yeon gets tired of this. She then notes that they are finally walking away. She notes this is nothing new and is another reminder of how terrible the servants are in these quarters. She starts to sleep, but the idiot opens the door saying she sees Yeon is up. Yeon says she just woke up and mentions that it is raining. The idiot then tells Yeon to look at this and mentions how she was caned before asking why Yeon went to Central Hall. She says they caned her because of Yeon, as Yeon frowns. Yeon asks why she is being blamed and asks if Dangjim should blame her own laziness. The idiot says, "What did you say?" She tells Miss Yeon that she cannot say this to her and Uigang would be disappointed if he heard how rude she is. Yeon says her head hurts and tells the idiot to just fill the cup of tea and go rest. The lazy idiot smiles as she internally calls Yeon a beggar who can't do anything without her. She tells Yeon that she is old enough to get her own tea, and that Yeon left her with no choice, acting like a spoiled child. Suddenly someone calls for Yeon as they say Chief Go is here to see her. We later see many items of opulence shimmering as Yuegang carries his daughter. Chief Go, who is the head of finance, said the clan leader has sent her these gifts. The people murmur as Yon mentions how Grandpa always sends clan members gifts when he returns from his travels, so this must be a proclamation. This is his way of telling the servants to serve her properly, as even though she was once cast aside, she is still a descendant of the clan. She notes how she did not expect him to go this far as her father stands silent. Chief Go mentions the quality of the ermine fur and suggests it be made into a scarf. Yuegang then tells Chief Go to tell his father that he apologizes for being a bad son and wants to thank him for the generosity. However, he cannot accept these gifts as Yon is too young for things this precious. Yon is stunned and wonders how her father could return all this. Chief Go knows this is the leader's way of trying to make amends as he tells Yuegang to not worry about it. He says that he already got everyone their gifts and sees no reason Yon can't accept hers. He then tells Master Yuegang to take a look at these medicinal herbs. He starts to talk about how they are premium-priced herbs, and there's even a 50-year-old fleeciflower that is great for recovery. Yuegang then says he will thankfully accept the gifts as Chief Go says he knew Yuegang would. Her father says the chief knows him too well, as Chief Go says of course, as he's known Yuegang since Yuegang was 3. Chief Go then mentions how he almost forgot to give something. They are then presented with a box that stuns Yon. Yon says it can't be, as Chief Go says the clan leader has sent them the divine pill. The leader also said Yon can use it at her own discretion. The pill is shown with the box opened as Yon cannot believe it. She wonders if Grandpa is testing her, especially since her father did not say anything either. She notes how she expected him to urge her to take it already. Yon then overhears a scuffle going on as her maids argue with each other. Dengjiam snatches something as the other maid notices Yon watching. Dengjiam asks what it is and if she can just take a look. She then asks if Yon minds. Yon is silent as she recalls how this lazy idiot had sticky fingers during her past life. This idiot would constantly tell her that her father hated her and would steal the things her father sent her while spreading rumors that Yon threw the gifts out because she did not like them. The idiot then yells to hand that jade ornament as she notes the quality of it. She then smirks as she asks Yon to give it to her. Yon stares as Dengjiam says Yon got so many gifts, so she should get one herself as consolation for Yon getting her caned. Yon notes how she's gone back in time, but Dengjiam has not changed at all before grinning. She says wait a moment, but Dengjiam now smiles as well as she then yells the jade ornament is hers. Yon notes how she told the idiot to wait, but it seems like the idiot did not understand. The other maids notice this happening as they then start to ask for stuff. Yon notes how despite all her grandpa did, nothing has changed. Someone then comes in yelling Yon's name. It is her father, who mentions how much better Yon is thanks to the herbs grandpa sent. He smiles as he then says he can use them to make her medicine. He asks if he may do that for her as Yon says of course and that he does not need to ask. He tells her it belongs to her so they should be used as she wants. Yon asks what else she would do with them and smiles. She then calls her father and tells him that Dengjiam asked if she could have a jade ornament and asks him if that's alright. Her father seems stunned as Dengjiam turns in horror. Yon then mentions that the idiot wants one of Grandpa's gifts because she got punished due to Yon. Yon mentions she's unsure if she can give away something her grandpa gave. Her father asks what is the meaning of this as he asks Yon what she means the maid was punished due to Yon. The idiot backtracks asking what Yon is talking about and tries to say she never said that. Yon covers her mouth saying that is exactly what Dengjiam said and that she also said Yon could let her have one gift as she received so many. Yon continues to say that she wanted a day off due to getting punished as the idiot yells Yon's name. A dark aura seems to float in the air as all the servants flinch. Yuegang tells her to lower her voice. He then mentions how Yon may be young but that they should serve her before asking how dare she raise her voice. The idiot drops the floor apologizing as she has made a grave mistake. Yuegang continues to be enraged as the servant trembles. He continues to stare as she trembles even more. He clenches his fist before taking a breath. He tells her he will not let her arrogance slide and that she will kneel there till sun sets. He tells the other maid to watch her and make sure she carries out the punishment. He then lifts his daughter up and walks away. He continues to stomp away before he then slams the door shut. We are now at his living quarters as Yon then stares at her father pacing around the house. He asks if the servant always behaves like that before saying never mind. He then puts his hands on her shoulder and tells her not to feel guilty for what happened as the servant deserves to be punished. He tells her he will make sure this never happens again as silence ensues. Yon notes how he seems to feel more guilty than she does as she notes she's never seen him like this before. Yon notes that she now sees that her father was so busy trying to save her life that he did not care about much else. This is why he is so awkward at other things. Yet this is precisely why she wants to live a happy life with him this time around. Someone then calls for the young master and asks Yuegang where he wants his gifts to be placed. This is her father's personal assistant Iandu. He says to put the herbs in his quarter and the rest in Yon's. He then grabs his head saying wait a minute. He then grabs Yon's hand and says there is something he can't stop worrying about. Silence ensues for multiple scenes as he seems to not be able to get it out. Yon wonders what it could be about if he's struggling to get it out. He then asks if she would live with him in his quarters. She is stunned as he mentions it's only if she wants and he is not forcing her. He babbles on about how his building is large enough and how this is better as Yon notes she's never seen him ramble like this. He continues as she then notes this rap won't end if she does not stop him. She then yells she'd love to as he then sits in silence. He repeats her statement as she tells him she loves the idea. He then takes a big sigh of relief as he lifts her up and says thank you. She gives her a big hug as he thanks her very much. She wonders why someone esteemed like her father would get so nervous asking for his daughter's opinion. She then does note how warm and fuzzy it makes her feel inside. She notes how much brighter her father got after hearing her answer as well as the warmth of his embrace just made her so happy. As he carried her outside she mentions not it felt like nothing could stop her from smiling for the entire day. Later at night we see someone mention how Yuegang had disciplined the maid days after she was punished. Yuren mentions how people are saying the Grand Madam could not discipline the maid right so Yuegang had to handle it. She tells her mom that he tried to tarnish her name and asks if she will do something about it. Sun Dan who is the Grand Madam and she tells her daughter to not be reckless. She mentions how he did not hit the maid and only made her kneel for misbehaving. She says if she reprimands him for that she'll look even more of a fool. Urina tells her mom to do something as it's not hard to see father has taken interest in Yon, and that she might end up being the next clan leader. The mom is silent and says to bring Pio and Ak back to the compound. Urin wonders if her mom wants her to bring her own children here. Urin says she sent them to her in-laws, to which her mother says they have no choice but to bring them as her father won't embarrass her in front of her children. Also once they are around he'll forget about the useless girl who does not know martial arts. You wish you old hag.